and it's rather transparent, that the president is quite clearly susceptible to flattery, to emotional manipulation. And if you want to get what you want to get out of him, your first course is to be very deferential to him, his movement, his cause, and his personality. And that is just best practice. Is it a little distasteful? Sure.
The quickest way to upset Donald Trump is to query his success. He spent the past 12 hours insisting the US strikes achieved a total obliteration of Iran's nuclear sites, despite an intelligence report which cast some doubt on their effectiveness. The president is very unhappy that media outlets picked up on that report, as he made clear when speaking at the Nato summit this morning.
We have scum that's in this group, and not all of you are. You have some great reporters, but you have scum. CNN is scum. MSDNC is scum. The New York Times is scum. They're bad people. They're sick. And what they've done is they're trying to make this unbelievable victory into something less. Now, even they admit that it was hit very hard.
Well, scum, he said. Well, everything, though, certainly from the behaviour we've seen from world leaders at the NATO summit, does seem to revolve around that one man, Donald Trump. But has he really made all the progress he might have wanted? Iran might still build nuclear weapons. The Ukraine war is still raging on. Let's reflect on this with Noah Rothman, a US conservative commentator, senior writer, of course, at the National Review. Noah, it's hard to know where to start, really, with Trump, given what's happened in the past sort of 3 days or so, the attack on Iran, the ceasefire, etc. All these events, where do you think this leaves his standing with the American public?
So it's hard to say with regard to the American public, because we've seen some contradictory polling with regard to the satisfaction of the strikes and the desirability of engaging with Iran directly militarily. It does seem, however, that the Republican Party, insofar as we have numbers, Donald Trump's base, is very supportive of the strikes. CBS News had a poll yesterday that demonstrated roughly 8 in 10, 9 out of 10 Republicans believe the mission was necessary and support the operation. That is not to say that the very loud MAGA base, many of whom are overrepresented on podcasts, certainly overrepresented in the president's inner circle, are happy with this thing. There are a lot of people inside the intelligence community in particular, in and around Tulsi Gabbard, for example, who are very hostile to the idea of engaging with this part of the world and would like to see us extricate ourselves. And we've seen quite a few leaks from that quarter designed to impugn the president's motives and to suggest that the military operation was ineffective. I can't gainsay that intelligence. I don't have intelligence myself, but the DNI, the very preliminary Defense Intelligence Agency report that we're discussing, is contradicted by several other private and public analyses that will be synthesized in the coming days. It seems very unlikely that these strikes with this large ordnance, if you've ever seen 30,000 pounds of explosives go off, it's hard to imagine that it did very little damage. So I expect we'll see synthesized intelligence products in the next several weeks that will indicate that this was a more successful strike than the Defense Intelligence Agency report suggested.
So do you think it is likely that actually that leak of that initial assessment, the timing really was to try and shape the debate when he was at the NATO summit to say, actually, it hasn't been very effective, just to cast doubt on the whole idea of engaging in this kind of activity in the Middle East?
I mean, it is admittedly speculative on my part. However, it does comport with what we saw in the run-up to these strikes, leaks out of the intelligence community in the United States, selective leaks in the United States, indicating that Iran was nowhere near close to weaponization, had not made the attempt to weaponize. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, during sworn testimony before the Senate, contradicted that assessment, said, it seems to us that it looks like, I'm paraphrasing, it seems to us that it looks like they're building a fissionable device. And the president himself, when queried about Tulsi Gabbard's assessment back in March that the Iranian nuclear program was not advancing, he said point blank, she's wrong. And I don't believe her. I don't frankly know how she can retain her job if the president says he no longer has any confidence in her. That's something she has to query in her own soul. But we do see a pattern of behavior here that does suggest the intelligence community is, as you say, trying to shape the debate.
Yeah. Just to go back on something you said earlier, Noah, about this idea of 8 out of 10 Republican supporters being in favor of those strikes on Iran, because of course here we have this idea that there is a split in the MAGA community between those who don't want any more foreign wars. Do you think really it's actually that poll is more reflective, that people are not as divided about this as we might think?
Well, I think Republicans are less divided about it than certainly a narrative that was promulgated in the mainstream press, relying on the as I said, very overrepresented voices who dominate the podcast spectrum in the United States, who dominate a particular sort of political media on the MAGA right. They are very committed to a project of retrenchment and recalibrating America's alliances abroad. But it's never been clear to me that this was a desideratum that is shared by the broader Republican community. It was more of an activist cause. And the president's decision to go in the opposite direction will take the Republican Party with him. Donald Trump is the head of this movement. He defines its terms. He sets its objectives, and Republicans have generally fallen in line with them over the course of the last 10 years. I don't know why this would be any different.
He is the head of the movement. He also seems sort of to be the king of the world at the moment. Extraordinarily deferential language being used towards him by the head of Nato, Mark Rutte. Have you ever, I mean, what is going on? Trump now seems to be in a position where no one will gainsay him. Everybody wants to curry favour with him. It is a very odd situation we find ourselves in.
Well, there's an element of child psychology to it, and it's rather transparent that the president is quite clearly susceptible to flattery, to emotional manipulation. And if you want to get what you want to get out of him, your first course is to be very deferential to him, his movement, his cause, and his personality. And that is just best practice. Is it a little distasteful? Sure. I wouldn't want to engage in it.
Does it work, though? Does it work in the long term?
It does seem to. Certainly when it comes, for example, the Russian government, I don't believe, would have enjoyed the many concessions that it received up front in those negotiations, which, frankly, in my view, scuttled the negotiation process over a ceasefire in Ukraine in the absence of that kind of obsequious deference to the president and his movement. You can cite leader after leader, Bukele in El Salvador, to a lesser extent, Zelensky himself. Everybody understands that to a certain degree, the way to get what you want out of this president is to come hat in hand and genuflect. That does seem to work. It's best practice. I wish it weren't so, but it is.
Yeah. Well, then, is there any kind of underlying philosophy to what Trump is doing? Then J.D. Vance has at various times tried to sort of weave this into some kind of a philosophy of conservatism, protecting American interests. Does that have any basis in reality, do you think, or is it really just, as you said, child psychology?
To a certain extent, I think success speaks for itself. I think the president is focused on his legacy. The degree to which he talks about the Nobel Peace Prize, I think he's genuinely sincere in his desire to secure that. And why would you want that but for a legacy achievement? So the president does want to leave behind a legacy of a presidency that Americans will look back on and say, well, that wasn't too bad after all. So that is his real guiding principle. Is there an ideology behind that? No, I don't think so. I think he's highly pragmatic. I think a lot of people want to make his outlook and his behavior comport with a framework, but it tends not to. It tends to depart from it in various ways. Depends on the issue. You'll find a very different Trump with a very different political philosophy applied to that particular issue. So I think he's much more pragmatic. I don't think he occupies a fixed point on an ideological spectrum. He flits about, and it has to do with whatever circumstances he's encountering. In this particular circumstance, the Iran strikes, he perceived a window of opportunity, and he perceived the continuity of the American position here. Every American president since Bill Clinton has said we will not allow nuclear proliferation in Iran. And the president merely executed those threats. I think you could say that's continuity of American policy, but I don't see it as ideological. I don't see much ideology there at all. It's frankly, there was an objective and he secured it.
Noah, thank you very much. I think we've seen that again and again from Trump. That was Noah Rothman, senior writer with the National Review in the United States.